Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. So, I get to spend a lot of time with business and data leaders. And a brilliant aspect of that is seeing how and where they spend their time at work. Now, at Cynozure, we also get to help a lot of organizations either set up data leadership or perform data leadership. So, we're constantly tackling and refining and assessing how best to be productive and the best ways to make an impact when you're starting a data strategy, when you're leading the implementation of a data strategy, when you're driving the agenda forward with data within your organization. And what I've seen is a broad brush pattern from those that are successful in terms of how they spend their time. Now, of course, every chief data officer, CDO, as I'll refer to them from here on in, is impacted by a really broad range of variables. So, company size they work for, the industry, the geographical spread of the organization, their growth pace or decline pace in that fact, the internal and external challenges that their organization has, their level of authority, their span of control, all sorts of things and variables that impact on the data leader, the CDO themselves. And so it means how a CDO chooses, or sometimes more accurately is forced to spend their time, can be dependent on some or all of those variables. And the timing and context will also dictate this to some degree. So even if there is a pattern, things in the world happen, and that can impact on how an individual has to spend their time. Sometimes a CDO might need to dial up strategic planning during, planning and budgeting cycles. Sometimes they need to focus heavily on, current projects and programs that they're on as they get to those really crunchy stages, and some real attention needs to be focused to make sure they get over the line. Other times during sort of growth phases, it may need to be on recruitment. They may need to spend more time talking externally if there's some, if they're doing city results, if it's a public company. But what is true is that there are some kind of core overarching elements that every chief data officer should work towards in order to define and steer their strategy to some kind of success for themselves and for their business and for the teams that are working with them. So what does that look like? How should CDOs spend their time? Well, it's the 40-30-20-10 rule. That's what I think is a really nice split on how a CDO should spend their time. So let me break some of that down. So 40% of the time should be on engagement and showing levels of leadership. So engagement is all about engaging the organization, communicating with the organization, building relationships with other business leaders and peers of the CDO to make sure that they have the right engagement sets in place with peers, that they understand the organizational challenges, they understand the opportunities, they understand what drives the individuals that are shaping and moving the business forward. They're validating their assumptions and other people's assumptions about how the business works. They're measuring their impact. They're talking to people. They're sharing updates with the organization. They're probably doing some kind of internal, external, what I call marketing, but that's essentially talking about what they're doing, celebrating what they're doing, sharing how much success they're having as a business leader. And leadership is about building high performing teams and literacy across the organization. So that's educating the organization, elevating the overall IQ and EQ probably of the people within the organization. And then the macro effect of that is that the IQ of the organization goes up, inspiring others through role modeling, what good looks like, promoting excellence, developing talent and creating the next generation of data leaders and data professionals within the organization. So 40% of the time, most of the time should be spent on engaging the organization, showing a level of leadership, and putting what we're trying to achieve really on a pedestal and driving the vision forward. Now, 30% of the time should be spent on defining the strategy itself and planning for the future. So we need to be making sure that the vision is clear and understood, understanding where you are as an organization and what needs improving, defining the strategic objectives of the data and of analytics and of insight of a business, and aligning to the business plan of the organization itself. Thinking about 2 or 3 years time ahead and preparing for that. Whilst you might execute for now, you need to prepare and think about 2 to 3 years time, look at the future and prepare for it. understanding technology that can support the journey today and in the future and what's coming down the line to make sure we're not missing a trick of innovation and improvement within what we're doing. And really importantly, measuring the impact that you have and using that to further shape and define and stretch and pivot and adjust and make better the strategy that you have in place. So 30% of the time should be spent on defining the strategy and planning for the future. 20% of data leaders' time should be spent on the day-to-day execution of the strategy. Now, what we see most of the time is that something like 80-90% of data leaders' time is spent on this, but actually it should be more like 20%. And that's because the role of the CDO should be about monitoring progress, helping to remove blockers if people are stuck, getting things out of the way, developing and recognizing the team, building solutions and implementing change, but through their team, and helping to fix problems. Now, the other side of this is about engendering a focus and attention and culture of innovation and R&D. But again, this should be executed by the team. So 20% of a CDO's time should be spent on day-to-day execution, but it's much more about monitoring progress, helping define the plan and removing blockers than it is on hands-on execution. And finally, 10% of the time should be dedicated to personal and professional development. So the organization really is only as good as the people that are within it, and the leadership of the data strategy and the leadership that the CDO can provide is only as good as the skills and capabilities and the experiences that they've had. So 10% of their time should be dedicated to improving themselves, because improving themselves will help to better the people that are within the organization, or help them to better understand how to be a good CDO. So working on themselves, reading, networking, peer-to-peer learning, looking at other countries, looking at other organizations and understanding how they're performing, how they're delivering results through data and analytics, and then using that to help them with their with the rest of the focus that I've talked about in terms of the engagement and leadership, the defining and shaping strategy and planning for the future, and the day-to-day execution. So 10% of the time focused on developing them as a better person. Now, look, these are, of course, approximations. And as mentioned before, the variables, timings, context all play a part. But if we take a step back and look at what's needed to generate success over both the sort of short, medium, and long term, and to make sure that it's sustained and sustainable beyond the work of the CDO today, it's got to be a priority to get to this mix of percentages. Now, of course, getting to 40, 30, 20, 10 as a rule isn't an overnight switch for most people, even if it's something you wanted to do. I mentioned that actually often this is sort of a little bit the other way around in terms of about 80% of the time spent on execution, and then a small amount of time on engagement and then on setting the plan and the strategy for the future. But it is something you want to look towards. And as your team grows, as your organization matures and develops and allows you to divide your time in this way, you can really begin to get some benefit from it. And if you think of this as the end state, the 40, 30, 20, 10 is the end state you want to get to, and work back to what's needed in order to get there, in order to operate in that way, it may change how you construct your team. It may change how you focus on what you're working on, and how you set up the strategy for the organization. And what you really want to be getting to is a point where you're able to work on the strategy for the organization rather than in the strategy for the organization. So look, I'd be really keen to hear from those in data leadership positions on how close you are to spending time in this 40, 30, 20, 10 way. If it's not that, it would be great to hear how it is in your current role and what you're aspiring to get to. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope the 40, 30, 20, 10 resonates, and we'll catch you again soon sometime.